Welcome to the November 3rd, 2025 workshop for the Chino Valley Fire District Board of Directors. The time is 4:30 p.m. Board members, please make sure to comment and have your microphones on and talk directly into it. Roll call and open session. I will now open the meeting and take roll. Director Howie.
Here.
Director Luth.
Here.
Director Romaine.
Present.
Vice President Krieger.
Here.
And myself present. And Director, or Vice President Krieger, would you do the flag salute first,
Sure.
please? Thank you.
Please join me with the pledge. Ready, begin.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, all right. We'll do our next. All right, Clerk of the Board, do we have any changes to the agenda this evening?
We have no changes to the agenda.
Okay, all right.
And the first item on the agenda is public communications. This is the time and place for the general public to address the Board of Directors about subjects that do not appear elsewhere on the agenda. The public may address items on the agenda at the time addressed by the board. Due to board policy and Brown Act requirements, action may not be taken on any issue not on the agenda. When you address the board, please state your name and address prior to making your remarks. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and we have no requests to speak at this time.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is new business. Item number 1, standards of cover assessment for the fire district. The purpose is for the Board of Directors to receive a presentation from Citygate Associates regarding a standards of cover assessment. And introducing this report is Fire Chief Dave Williams.
Good evening, Board. This evening, as we've been working on for quite some time over the last several months, we are very, very happy to be able to have Mr. Sam Mazza from Citygate here to provide the standard of cover update presentation to you. And we look forward to any questions you may have. And Sam, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening, Madam President, board members. My name is Sam Mazza. I was the lead consultant for this engagement with you, and it's my second round with Chino Valley Fire District. Very happy to be back here with you this evening. We like to start our presentations just as a reminder to the readers of our reports and those in the audience tonight that there are no federal or state laws or regulations mandating any level of staffing, response performance, or outcomes relative to fire services. So the level of service provided is a local policy decision, it's a local policy choice, and communities have the level of service that they can afford and which they choose to fund. And sometimes there's constructive tension between what a community may want and what they can afford or are willing to pay for. Given those choices, we subscribe that outcome goals should drive deployment. We start with what is the desired outcome. In typical urban-suburban communities, desired outcomes are typically to prevent death or permanent medical impairment from a medical emergency where possible, and to confine building fires to the room or compartment of origin, rescue persons unable to self-evacuate, and to save as much personal property as possible. Delivering desired outcomes is a function of adequate staffing, training, apparatus types, and response times. Given those desired outcomes, then, what are the different deployment strategies? And so deployment in fire service is essentially about the speed and weight of a response. Speed refers to single neighborhood-based first response units to mitigate routine to moderate emergencies to deliver the desired outcome. And weight refers to multiple unit responses for more serious emergencies needed to control those, again, for the desired outcome. And then specialty units are deployed in addition to or in lieu of engines, squads, and ladder trucks to mitigate special hazards such as aviation incidents, water rescues, and things of that nature. Our scope of work for this engagement included an update to your 28 standards of cover master plan update. So it's an update to an update. We were engaged and charged with performing a complete standards of cover deployment assessment, conducting a headquarters services assessment update, and conducting a future service needs assessment update. Our capstone findings to this work You have a very high-performing organization working diligently to deliver high-quality services. We found that most of your programs and services are conducted in alignment with recommended best practices, which is district is to be commended for, but you have a few challenges going forward. And I will point out at this point, while it looks like a little challenging, 5 challenges moving forward, 3.5 of those are carryovers from the 2018 report. So really only about 1.5 new challenges that we'll talk about here this evening. Those include slow call processing, dispatch performance, first unit travel time coverage gaps, inadequate effective response force or first alarm travel time coverage for those weight of response to more serious emergencies, how the district utilizes its paramedic squads, and some headquarters support functions lack sufficient staff capacity for workload. So relative to challenge number 1, slow call processing dispatch performance, we remind you that there are 3 components to the response time continuum. The first is call processing dispatch. This is from the time the fire dispatch center picks up the 911 call until the completion of the dispatch sequence. The second component is what we call crew turnout. That starts when the dispatch is completed. The crew dons the appropriate personal protective equipment for the type of emergency, boards the fire apparatus, fastens their seatbelt, and the apparatus is not yet moving. And then the third component is actual travel time from the start of movement till arrival at the emergency incident. So for call processing dispatch performance, best practice for EMS and fire incidents, we only look at the most exigent type of incidents, EMS and fire incidents. The National Fire Protection Association, it's 1 minute 4 seconds is their best practice. We have long said 1.5 minutes, 90% of the time to fire and EMS incidents is a best practice. And the current district benchmark is 1.5 minutes. So that's consistent with what Citygate recommended in our last standards of cover update. For 2024, CONFIRE, which is your Contract Dispatch Center, Joint Powers Authority, you can see over there in about the 3rd column from the right, the 90th percentile performance in 2024 for just fire and EMS incidents was 3 minutes, 21 seconds. Again, that compares to the 1 minute 4 seconds NFPA best practice and the 1 minute 30 seconds Citygate best practice and current district benchmark. So that's about 123% slower than best practice. We looked a little deeper at just the most serious EMS incidents, critical fire EMS incidents, and looking at just at that subset of all fire and EMS incidents, the 90th percentile performance in 2024 was 3 minutes and 1 second. So about 20 seconds faster for just most critical compared to all fire and EMS incidents, still more than double the 1.5 minutes recommended best practice for Citygate and the current district benchmark. What are some prospective solutions to that issue? We suggest that the district collaborate with CONFIRE management to identify the factors causing this slower than desired performance and to seek to identify and implement solutions to bring performance into closer alignment with best practice. Second challenge, this is a carryover again from the 2018 study, is first unit travel time gaps. First unit travel time best practice from us for urban and suburban zones to achieve those desired outcomes we talked about earlier. For call processing dispatch, again, 1.5 minutes is both Citygate and the current district benchmark. Crew turnout, NFPA is 1 minute 20, Citygate and the district benchmark are 2 minutes. First unit travel, best practice is 4 minutes for that first unit to get there in 7.5 minutes or so. So you'll recall that if desired outcomes should drive deployment, if desired outcomes include preventing death or permanent impairment from a medical emergency and confining building fires to the room or compartment of origin, then getting that first unit to the incident within about 7.5 to 8.5 minutes is critical before irreversible brain death starts to occur or a building fire reaches the flashover stage. It's important to remember that the brain can only survive 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen before the onset of irreversible damage. So this slide shows the 74.5 road miles in Chino Hills in yellow there that cannot be expected to be reached within 5 minutes travel time from an existing fire station, including your future Station 68. That's 11.5% of the total service area road miles. Pretty significant gap there, and that's the same as it was last time. And then this slide shows the 65 road miles in Chino that cannot be expected to reach within 5 minutes travel time from an existing fire station. And that yellow area totals 10% of total service area road miles. Combined, those two service gap areas, travel time gap areas, total 21.5% of the total public road miles within the district's service area. And you'll see here in this slide also that that first gap area in Chino Hills has a population density of 1,000 to more than 7,500 people per square mile, and the gap area in Chino has a population density of 500 to 7,500 people per square mile. So still fairly significant population density outside that 5-minute travel coverage. Prospective solutions to that challenge include considering dynamic deployment of your paramedic squads to high EMS call density areas during peak EMS demand hours of the day, much like ambulance companies deploy their ambulances. You'll see them in parking lots of grocery stores and Starbucks and places like that. They're putting them where they expect the next call to be. Second option might be consider deployment of 1 or 2 what we would call light-duty, all-risk units staffed with 2 personnel. Those could be deployed from a residential or commercial building within the travel time gap areas. And the third might be consider additional fire stations within those first unit travel time gap areas as a future goal. Challenge number 3, inadequate, what we term effective response force or first alarm travel time coverage. This is that multiple units to the more serious emergencies. Best practice for ERF travel time in urban suburban zones to achieve desired outcomes is 8 minutes in order to have that all of those units arrive within 11.5 to 12 minutes. So for the district, current ERF for a building fire is 4 engines, 1 truck company, 2 paramedic squads, and 2 chief officers. And if you look at that, this is what it covers. It only covers 1.5% of the total public road miles within the service area. And the reason for that is the location of the single ladder truck and the spacing of your fire stations that would preclude that 4th engine, and 2nd medic squad, and 2nd chief officer from arriving within 8 minutes. If we look at a reduced ERF of 3 engines, 1 truck, 1 medic squad, and 1 chief officer, which meets the NFPA recommended minimum of 16 personnel, still only covers 11.4% of the total public road miles. Again, the single ladder truck and the 4th engine are the primary factors limiting this ERF response performance. Prospective solutions to this challenge include considering a 2nd staffed ladder truck in Chino Hills, considering, again, deployment of 1 or 2 light-duty, all-unit, all-risk units staffed with 2 personnel deployed from a residential or commercial building within the identified travel time coverage gap areas. And also, again, considering additional station or stations within those first unit travel time coverage gap areas at some future point. 4th challenge identified in this update are paramedic squad utilization. Currently, there are 6 EMS call type determinant categories from medical priority dispatch system, starting with Alpha, the least severe, to Echo, the most severe, and then there's also the Omega category, which are the lowest priority, not requiring an immediate EMS response. The district's current response plan is to send a paramedic squad plus an ambulance plus an engine to all EMS call types regardless of acuity. This is a total of 7 personnel including from 4 to 7 paramedics to all EMS incidents regardless of acuity. The district did conduct a pilot study in 2020 and 2021 where they tested a tiered EMS response plan where only an engine was sent to Alpha, Bravo, and Omega level calls, the lowest acuity EMS calls, and the traditional response of the engine and the squad to the Charlie, Delta, and Echo level calls, the more serious EMS calls. The results of that pilot study showed a slight increase in first unit response time for the lower acuity calls, primarily because the engines are a little slower traversal speed than the squads, a lighter duty vehicle. But the impact on simultaneous EMS calls within the same station areas was not studied. And then the district reverted to a traditional response plan back in January 2021, and that's still in place today. So out of all that, Citygate considers the district's traditional response plan appropriate for higher acuity EMS calls, but we consider it excessive for lower acuity calls, and also potentially, we think, impacting availability of those paramedic squads for the higher acuity concurrent calls within the same general geographic area. Prospective solutions to this, we would suggest that the district complete its analysis of the pilot study relative to the impact on simultaneous EMS calls within the same geographic station response area as soon as possible, and then reconsider implementing a tiered EMS response plan similar to what was done in the pilot study, engine only to Alpha, Bravo, and Omega calls, traditional response to Charlie, Delta, and Echo level calls, the more serious, higher acuity calls. The last challenge identified in this update is headquarters staffing capacity gaps. We found that with few exceptions, headquarters functions are appropriately organized and supervised. There are challenges being experienced with the long-term absence of the support services deputy chief since July 2023 on loan to the Confire Joint Powers Authority, and then the elimination of the 2 administrative battalion chief positions in January of this year. We found some of the headquarters functions understaffed in some areas to meet regulatory requirements, workload, and/or performance benchmarks or expectations. And we also found some critical single points of failure. So a single point of failure in our mind is a critical process or procedure where only one person knows how to do that particular process, and if that person is absent for any extended period of time or leaves employment with the district unexpectedly, something serious is going to fall through the cracks. So those capacity gaps and single points of failure that we identified for the administration division include the HR director's responsibilities. Nobody knows how to do most of those responsibilities other than the human resource director. Some of the workers' compensation and risk management functions have no backup or redundancy. There is a lack of a dedicated, qualified IT manager to manage the information technology function of the district, and there is insufficient information technology analyst capacity. In the Emergency Services Division, we found inadequate coordination, technical support for the 43 administrative programs and responsibilities assigned to the battalion chiefs, the shift battalion chiefs. So each of the shift battalion chiefs has multiple administrative programs, services that they're responsible for coordinating and managing. Many of those were previously managed and coordinated by the administrative battalion chiefs, who were then moved over to shift battalion chief, and they would carry those responsibilities with them, in addition to their new operational and supervisory responsibilities. In the Support Services Division, we found ineffective lines of supervision where the facilities technicians and the fleet mechanics are supervised by a deputy chief. In the EMS Training Division, we found insufficient EMS continuous quality improvement capacity to meet regulatory requirements, insufficient community risk reduction inspection capacity, insufficient community risk reduction community outreach and public education capacity, and insufficient community risk reduction development review, backup, and surge capacity. So as you saw in your report, our prospective solutions to these headquarters capacity gaps and single points of failure include additional FTE totaling from about 7.15 to almost 11 FTE. And you'll see that there's a suggested implementation category on the far right column there. We broke these down into 3 different categories. With the A category, from our perspective, these are positions that must be added to meet regulatory requirements. The B categories should be considered to resolve critical single points of failure. And the C category should be considered to resolve organizational or workload capacity gaps, meet a recommended best practice, or meet district performance standards or expectations. So again, we don't break those down in terms of which one should come first, or do they all need to happen at the same time. We leave that up to you to decide. These are the total gaps that we think and the full-time equivalent personnel that are needed to resolve those. Just as a matter of comparison, looking back at your 2018 headquarters staffing capacity update, at that point in time, we found a need for 1.87 to 3.25 additional personnel in headquarters, but I don't know if those were implemented over the intervening years or not. And then I also wanted to leave you this. This is a comparison of other administrative support staffing to operational response staffing of other Citygate Fire District client agencies. So again, these are all fire districts, some in California, some outside of California, to give you a sense for what percentage of total staff are admin versus response personnel. And it ranges from about 21.4 to a little over 33%. You can see there that you're sitting right at about 25.8 with your current staffing. So that concludes kind of the high-level review. Now I want to go into a little more detail about the deployment, the standards of cover assessment summary. Overall, your service demand has increased over 42% since 2014, including a 3.9% increase over the last 3 years, which is approximately 1.3% annually. And the district currently responds to over 14,000 calls for service annually. District has a high simultaneous incident activity percentage, primarily impacting stations 65, 66, and 67. We found 2 or more simultaneous incidents occur 47% of the time. So 47% of the time, if there's one active incident, there's a second one or more occurring within that same time frame. 3 or more simultaneous incidents occur 14% of the time. We further found that no staffed response units are approaching a Citygate recommended 30% unit hour utilization workload saturation threshold. And what that means, we look at a typical workday for fire station personnel, and we found that if their call volume, if they're working more than 30% unit hour utilization over multiple consecutive hours, something's falling off the plate. And typically the first thing to fall off the plate is training. But as I mentioned, none of your staff response units are yet approaching that threshold. So they're busy, but they're not overly busy from our perspective. Again, your call processing dispatch performance is more than double the 1.5 minute district benchmark and the Citygate recommended best practice. However, I'm very pleased to report to you that there's been no decay in crew turnout or first unit travel performance since the 2018 report. Crew turnout continues to meet the 2-minute goal, and first unit travel at 6 minutes 14 seconds is still 56% slower than the 4-minute best practice. However, it was 6 minutes 22 seconds in 2018. So it's improved slightly since 2018, which is very good. First unit call to arrival performance, that's from the pickup of the 911 call in the dispatch center to arrival of the first unit at the emergency incident. For 2024, it was 10 minutes and 4 seconds. That's 34% slower than the 7.5 minute current district benchmark and Citygate recommended goal for urban suburban areas of the district. This is due, again, predominantly due to slower call processing dispatch performance. As I mentioned earlier, the crew turnout and the first unit travel have not eroded since 2017, 2018. So that degradation in response capacity there is predominantly due to that slower dispatch performance. And again, the district has not changed its EMS deployment model since the 2018 update, other than for the 2020-2021 pilot study. So in terms of deployment recommendations, we recommend the district adopt updated response performance goals. You'll see those listed here on the slide for both the urban-suburban sections of the district versus the rural areas of the district. Call processing dispatch, 1.5 minutes, consistent with our previous recommendation in 2018. Crew turnout, no change there, 2 minutes, 90% of the time. We're suggesting the district adopt a 6-minute first unit travel goal for the urban-suburban areas and 9 minutes for the rural areas of the district, which would then arrive at a total first unit call to arrival of 9.5 minutes in the urban-suburban areas and 12.5 minutes in the rural sections of the district. And then for the effective response force travel, we're suggesting the district adopt a 9-minute time goal for that last unit in the urban-suburban areas of the district and 16 minutes in the rural areas of the district, which would result in 12.5 minutes total response time call to arrival for the ERF in the urban-suburban areas, 19.5 minutes in the rural areas of the district. And this is in closer alignment with what actual response has been over the last 3 years. Our deployment recommendations include consider a second staffed ladder truck in Chino Hills, reconsider a tiered EMS response plan, again, consider dynamic deployment of the medic squads during peak demand hours, complete the pilot study data analysis on impacts on concurrent incidents within the same geographic response area, and consider planning for future stations within the 5-minute travel time coverage gap areas. And that concludes my briefing. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Do we have any requests to speak on this item? No. Okay, this is time for the board to comment, and see, Director Ruth, would you like to start us off? Thank you.
You mentioned a light-duty vehicle to maybe enhance our EMS response. What kind of vehicle are you talking about there? Another squad or something different?
Well, what we're suggesting would be a vehicle about the same size as the squad, but include a small fire pump, small water tank, so it's all risk, able to initiate suppression on smaller fires as well as EMS calls for service.
Okay. Do we know these, I can't remember what they're called, the time stampers or whatever they were called, do we have a handle on what happened there, why we had all those?
Yeah, Director Luke, there's been quite a few changes. Obviously, from the first study, we went from Ontario Dispatch to Confire Dispatch, and there are many new philosophies that are out there. Not to say that the one that's being judged against is the right one or the wrong one, but we have already been working with our Confire partners to look into this a little bit deeper to make sure that we are meeting our goals, to see if there's any more that we can do with having the turnout or the process time speed up, and to really evaluate what is actually causing that to occur.
Okay, yeah, that's a different issue. Yeah, what, so others that are being served by Confire are experiencing the same issue?
Correct, yeah, so we did probably, Chief Old, how long ago did we come together with the consolidated agencies to discuss accepting a local metric?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. So actually, back in April of 2024, the Confire Admin Committee essentially had an item come on their agenda to revise their response standards as well. I think one thing you might be talking about, Chief, is that out of COVID, the JPA adopted different standards essentially for their interrogations for different call types. So if I understand your question correctly, Director Luth, you're talking about the call processing time and what would be responsible for that lengthened call processing time, and is that just for us or all of Confire?
Well, yeah, I was actually asking about the timestamp discrepancies that appear to be on us, but I'm not sure, that led to some data that.
So I can probably address that.
Oh, okay, I think I understand.
For the ERF responses, when I looked at ERF response performance for this district, it just didn't pass the smell test to me. So I dug a little deeper because we're only looking at, I believe, 13 incidents over the 3 years. So I got the timestamps from the data that we had uploaded from Confire for those 13 incidents. And what I found in there were several cases where there was either no timestamp for time of dispatch, time the first unit en route, or the time the unit arrived, or the timestamps were all identical for all the units. Of course, that doesn't make sense either. So to me, in looking at those 13 incidents, and I saw for, I believe it was 6 or 7 of them, timestamps that were just completely, didn't make any sense to me. They were clearly an error somewhere in the dispatch center. So to me, I couldn't put any credibility in that total dispatch or total response performance for ERF based on what I found in those timestamps. We weren't contracted or scoped to delve that deep to all the other incident types, but it caused me some concern that for those 13 significant building fire incidents, we saw that high number of discrepancies, I guess is the best way to put it.
I think I understand the question. I might be able to speak to some of it, not necessarily all of it, having it in front of me, but a classic example of a missed timestamp. So there are certain timestamps that are human-driven. So example, especially with a significant call. And specifically because Chief Mazza is speaking about the total ERFs, that emergency response force is when we get enough bodies on scene, if you will, enough firefighters on scene to do the tasks that are designed for the whole fire. So the NFPA has a minimum recommendation. We actually over-dispatch and over-assign beyond the minimum. So that's why you heard 2 numbers regarding ERF. But let's take the lowest number. You need to have a certain number of people on scene to trigger that as a quantifiable data set. So when it comes to timestamps, one common timestamp issue is if it's a chaotic scene, when the engine arrives on scene, the officer may come up on the radio and tell the incident commander that they're on scene, but may forget, as a human error, to push the button that says on scene. So that's a very classic one, and in that case, what you're gonna experience is, in the computer or in the CAD, that engine that is required to trigger that ERF data set number, let's say that they got there in 10 minutes hypothetically. If they forget to push the button and they go to work and they get assigned something, that engine in the computer is still gonna show them as responding and not actually on the scene yet. So that would skew that data set, which would make it hard to use, and that's part of that human element. There are certain triggers that can be used, however, we've at this point elected not to use them. As an example, one data set point is called wheels rolling. We can use like a response metric of when the time that the station gets the tone to when the apparatus physically rolls out of the station. You can choose to use that. We use what's called button push because what we found when we originally came over to the AVL dispatching, due to certain issues with cellular coverage or transitioning between the modem from the station Wi-Fi to cellular when it leaves the stations, there was sometimes that engines wouldn't trigger that wheels rolling until they were like a block away from the station. So we had these different spots within the district that we chose to use that human element as opposed to that automated metric. So very long answer to a short question, but if that makes sense, those the CAD data elements that are driven by a button push or a timestamp Often they're human-driven, and sometimes even what we found is when you see a bunch of resources put on scene, or they have the same time, sometimes it's when the dispatcher recognizes they're already there, and the dispatcher manually puts them on scene, so you'll have a list of them go on scene at the
They
same time.
announce over the radio that they're going on scene as well?
They do, and what we found is that one of the operating aspects of Confire is that you'll have multiple frequencies assigned to a fire. The primary dispatcher listens to what's called the command frequency, but most of our units will do the majority of their traffic on what's called the tactical frequency. The tactical frequency is, the battalion chief actually listens to all those frequencies, and he primarily uses the command frequency to speak to the dispatch center. But the engine companies and the squads stay primarily on the tactical frequency. So if they say I'm on scene, the battalion chief will hear it. Dispatcher may not necessarily, they monitor, but they don't listen specifically to the tactical like they do the command frequency.
Sorry.
Is there, can we get an exception report when those things happens? Like, almost immediately after the incident, so we can maybe correct that data and have.
Yeah, I think one of the great tools, one of the great things about this tool is it gives us those performance metrics to go back and say, okay, look, in our monthly operations meeting, we can say, okay, it looks like we're having issues with button push. I think the challenge you may be looking for is that, it's not gonna be flagged right away without running this kind of a query on it. Because if you go to put your report in, the captain may adjust it in the report to correct it, but it might not necessarily be reflected in CAD. So it's basically a tool that we can go back and really use our attention to talk to Confire and see if we can drill down on that.
Yeah, it just seems like we should be able to get some kind of report out, but that if we exceed these parameters, we wanna know about it, so potentially
yeah.
make the correction in CAD, so.
A follow-up question on the same thing, are your numbers generated from the NFIRS report or from the Confire's CAD?
Both,
Both.
Both.
And they're not matching?
correct.
And then are those numbers significantly, worse than when you did it in 2018 as far as on those events?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look at that older report as well, but this time it just caused me to dig a little deeper because I just couldn't believe that it took 24 minutes or so to get the last unit there within this district. I know better than that.
And we discussed this very topic in 2018 with that report, and we had brought up, I could be wrong, but I remember we had a full explanation, Jeremy, of, you know, what you did, and I knew what the manual push and everything, so, I believe that we had some of those calls as well that were identified.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
many of
know, I
these-
don't recall how many, but I know we talked.
Many of these types of data points come back to us as like a human management factor, right? So it'd be, to Director Lu's point, if we were to generate a report that says, okay, these are the specific lack of button push, that can help us drive some of those performance pieces back to the captains to reinforce, hey, make sure you're getting the button push and those kinds of things. The interesting part, anecdotally, is to note that it doesn't, I think that the point that Sam was making is, it leaves us just lacking information, because it doesn't mean the engine didn't necessarily arrive on scene. That's what actually drove him to dig deeper, was, this doesn't seem right, so likely the engine, they arrived on scene, they went to work in an appropriate amount of
Right.
time, we just didn't have necessarily that data set to support that.
Right, yeah, I'm just suggesting maybe we can find a way to minimize that going forward. I just have one last, if we can follow up on, what, the dispatch time from Confire, that's very concerning, you know. So, we have been in contact with them already?
We have, it's actually been brought up several times at recent Confire administrative meetings, and we've even dug deeper to run additional numbers just to validate, so to answer a few questions. Yes, this is Confire wide, and we've had some good conversations with the interim executive director over there.
We should.
And yes, absolutely. And one of the reasons that he mentioned is, essentially, there has been a push at Confire, because they represent so many different agencies with so many different response needs, et cetera, there's been a big push to try and get the right unit to the right call. And so if you imagine what we mentioned with the EMD on medical calls, if you call 911, they don't just ask you what your address and where you live and what your problem is, they start going through a list of questions to determine the severity of the call. That's where that alpha, omega, all the way up to echo comes in. There's also a process that they use on high acuity fire calls as well. They call it an interrogation. They want to find out, is it a smoking outlet? Is it your house is on fire? Is it you drove by and you thought you saw smoke? They have a certain set of questions to try and make sure they have the right type of fire response. Because many of the different agencies have a different response plan that they'll send to a different fire call type. So one of the explanations as to why it's taking more time is that the person calls, the dispatcher picks up and starts asking questions. During that questioning phase, they haven't dispatched anything yet. So it's during that phase where they're asking questions to get the right understanding of what the call type is. That's what we call the call pickup to the queue. The queue is when they send the call over to the primary radio dispatcher, who reviews what's in to make sure the computer got it right with the appropriate response plan, and then pushes send and it tones out the station. So the combined there is what that call processing from call received to unit assigned. That's that little questioning portion in the middle. They've identified it as it does take more time. They are looking for human error, they're looking for streamlining to try and get those questions down to the right amount, but they're highly aware, and I think the most important part for us is, like we said, we've been talking about it, but now we have a good third-party look, so now we can make sure we're accounting for confirmation bias or whatever else. We can take this back to Confire and have a really good in-depth conversation about the system and where we need to make improvements as a member agency.
We have 4 minutes of them en route that the dispatcher can still be asking questions and updating, right?
Right.
I'd rather have the wheels get turning on the
Right.
road.
Those are some of those discussions we've had about a single unit response as what they call a quick launch and a few other things.
And one of the, I don't mean to interrupt you, one of the, what I feel one of the valuable tools here is that, and I was asking Sam this, I said, hey, are we, able to at least take these areas that we have concerns about or that are not lining up with where we are wanting to go and evaluate just those one-off items, let's say in a year or something like that. So that's the nice element about what we're having here is now we have some things that we, like every organization, we know we can improve on, and we can come back in 6 months, a year, whatever, 3 months, whatever the board sees fit. We can have the conversations, make the adjustments, and then continue to evaluate and hone in on specific items like this particular one.
I know their scripts are lengthy, especially for a heart patient, a patient that,
Yeah.
someone, very, very lengthy. Cause I actually had someone within my district that brought it to my attention and that they were letting the dispatcher know that he's not, and she kept asking the questions instead of listening. And she was she actually requested a copy of the call and, asked me
Right.
to, I told her to please complain there as well, that I needed her to do there. But I feel that their questioning, while it's important, absolutely can be streamlined to get the wheels rolling, so,
Sarah.
thank you, yes.
Jeremy had a quick question. As far as in the last 7 years since the last report, because this 2-minute extra time is pretty concerning. But is there a difference of when we deploy? Are we making better than we did 7 years ago? Are we more prepared when we get there to, is the quality of when we show up with this extra time? Has there been any kind of a difference in that? I mean, or is it pretty much when we show up?
Yeah.
Are we better prepared? Do we have better supplies or whatever we need to have? Has there been any difference in that?
I would say I hear two questions in one. First, I can say that once we get there, so one thing that's really good to hear, as you heard mentioned, is that our turnout times, the part that
Yes.
we're responsible for, that we can directly control with like behavioral stuff with our troops, that's on the mark. Our folks are hitting the 2-minute turnout time, which is really good to hear, because that's the performance aspect that we can directly influence. The travel time, as you mentioned, The district hasn't changed in size very much, it's gotten more congested over the last.
Well, that's
7
my
years,
other question
right?
was, what about in the last 7 years with the, it's gonna
Right.
take longer to get somewhere because.
Yeah,
More,
the
you gotta
reality
go around
is,
more
if-
people,
when we
right?
talk about response time, or, travel times, that's when the board gets into policy decisions about station placement, right? Because technically, if there's a fixed distance from where the station is to where the call is, if you drive the speed limit or what's the safe, it's gonna take you that amount of time, and you really can't make that many improvements with current stations. That's what drives discussions about station placement.
Okay.
But certainly when we're talking about what do we do when we get there, we absolutely have all the pieces intact to support, and that's gonna be a combination of our personal protective equipment, the equipment that we have with our folks, the training that they have, and the level of talent that we have as well. So as a learning organization, I'd love to say that we think we're always improving in those areas, that when we arrive on scene, so example, when the board supports purchasing brand new cardiac monitors that have all the latest indicators for our, you see that in our survival rates.
Right.
Now, so as an example, now to answer what I heard as a second question is, what are we doing to make that improvement in how we get on scene? Again, I think that's focused back to that training piece, and I hope I answered that question for you as well.
Okay.
All right, sorry, Director Lynn.
No, it's all good. I think I'll end my questions. I have a lot more questions, but I think at some point we should have a discussion. Don't need to tie up Sam. It's
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
understanding what's going on inside, but I really appreciate the report, the frankness of it, the good information. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so Director Romaine, would you like to be next?
Sure. A couple things, I guess I turn this on. A couple things just to, I read the whole thing and thank you. It's a very detailed report and I appreciate the work on it. Obviously, some of the high-level findings are a significant deficiency in our dispatch system. If we go, what is I guess my first question, mechanism of start of the time for the dispatch time? Are we doing it when Confire receives the call at their facility or when the people initiate the 911? Cause I know we've had issues, people using cell phones next to the
Correct.
freeway, going to the CHP or going to Chino Fire or to the sheriff, is that being taken account of, or is that, no, we're
No.
waiting, as soon as it gets to Confire?
So well, the first timestamp that we use is the time it's received at the fire dispatch center. In this case, it would be Confire. So Confire is a secondary PSAP, not a primary PSAP. So yes, Sheriff's Office, CHP, there's other primary local police departments are the primary PSAPs. Most of those have protocols in place where those transfers take place very, very fast. So,
But
but
in
the answer is we don't go back and look at that.
Okay.
We take that first timestamp at Confire.
So going back to our ultimate goal of getting there before the 6 minutes of life, of safety and trying to contain the fire, in reality, some of these calls might still be a minute and a half longer or a minute longer.
Probably not, but there is, I'm pretty sure that Confire can produce a report that shows call transfer times. And they'll be able to give you that data.
Okay, another question, and this was just coming up in the data, and I didn't know, it'd probably be more of a question to the chief, I was just curious. Were you guys able to pull out how much we are going to the prisons, the California prison systems? I know you had a metric, because it looked like from 22 to 24, we more than doubled the calls to the prisons. And then obviously we have 25 going, so I didn't know if that was a specific thing you pulled out?
We did not, we can, but we did not.
Okay.
Director Romaine, we can certainly, and this is for all the boards, you're asking some pretty specific questions. I assure the board, we can get to any answers to any specific questions you have. You just let us know what they are, and we'll work with staff and Confire to compile the information, and then not only just to get the information, but to decide where we want to go with it and work on solutions.
Okay. Then lastly, did 4.0 staffing ever come into play as being something that might change any of these metrics, in your opinion?
No.
Okay. That's it? I'll wait and let somebody else.
Okay, thank you, Director Romaine. Director Hallett?
Yeah, I wanna thank you. The report's obviously, pretty thorough, and It's interesting because you guys come up with things that you feel like as far as the number of employees that we should have. Is that just based on what is that based on when you do that? I mean,
So it's somewhat subjective, so it's based on our collective in our company's experience managing fire agencies,
okay,
discussions with staff about what is actually the gap, trying to drill down to, well, I'm really, really busy, well, what does that mean? You know, what is not getting done? And in terms of what's not getting done, is it not getting done on your timeline, on the chief's timeline, on some regulatory timeline, or is it just not getting done at all? So we try to drill down that far, and then we also work with staff to say, okay, what level of staffing, additional staffing is gonna be needed to resolve that gap?
okay, so it's pretty objective, subjective.
We try to be as objective as we can, but there's some subjectivity involved in it, and that's why we say consider.
Right.
Again, we try to give you a range,
Right.
so you've
And
got some
also
room to work.
the rural, like in the canyon, when you mentioned it was 11% or 14% of our service area. I mean, that sounds like that's a big amount of, well, it is a big amount of area from that point, but as far as a population standpoint, it's pretty minimal because there's not that many, the population in that area is not nearly as dense as it is closer to our fire stations.
Very true, very true.
Right?
Yes,
So, I
and you'll
mean-
see that in one of the maps in the volume 2.
Okay.
And Director Howe, I think one of the things that we've always recognized at Chino Valley Fire District is that it's not always a call volume issue for us. It's really, we don't have roads that go direct. We can't get through the prison, or
Sure.
we got
No, I-
waterways, or, that's
I understand.
that's literally gonna be a challenge that we have to contend with for years and years and
Yeah,
years.
I went up in the canyon and saw some of those roads. You need a Fiat to get through some of those with
If you
staff.
can get through them,
Right.
because people block them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's all I got. Thank you.
Vice President Krueger.
All right, I know Andy asked about prisons and response times there. I'm curious, just on a side note, about responses to the unincorporated area of Chino. In totality, how many calls are we going up there? Cause certain people think that one of our stations in particular spends all their time there and never somewhere else. So I'd like to know what the actual facts are
Certainly we can get that.
around that. Thank you for the report. It's actually one of my favorite reports that I see every 4 or 5 or 6 years, because it's so filled with such good data. I know one of the things you guys look at is potential future growth as well. Is there a recommendation in here for another station? And where it should be located?
There is, so we recommend the district consider in its long-term plan, 1 or 2 additional stations within those 5-minute travel time gap areas that we highlighted. One in Chino, the other in Chino Hills.
The one in Chino seemed to be north of the airport. Which is where a gap is, and the growth is in the south area.
Yeah, we're gonna have to, we've had many discussions with staff on that. Obviously, you know, Chief Smith is one of our data gurus locally, but we've had lots of discussions internal. I've had some preliminary discussions with the city about their growth down in the preserve and even more south.
Yeah.
And I think we would just have to come up with a little bit of a longer term plan as to the, even, I'm just gonna throw this out there, the appropriateness of the current station, whether that's the right location. And then, and what we haven't discussed, is even the development of the Heman Stark, you know, once the city acquires that land. So that's a
Right.
whole nother part of the conversation, is the existing station the right station? Or is it time to consider 2 stations that are separated even further? So these are policy decisions, and, I mean, there'll certainly be options there to discuss. But yeah, it's really gonna be south, not north.
Okay.
One of the tools that we can help you with in that regard is once you know and the city knows where that growth is actually going to occur, and as there are some proposed road networks out there that we can work with, we can certainly help you model response travel time from multiple locations to see where the best fit might be.
Excellent. Yeah, there's gonna be a potential 2 major growth roads that can, impact, certainly part of that.
Yeah.
That's it for me for now.
Okay, so some of my questions would be just directed more towards staff instead of asking Sam about that. But, one of the items that we talked about here was, our, getting there in time, our survival rate, which we know by factual that we have a very, very good survival rate. And we train well, we also train our community, well, but, we can definitely do better, with that. And we had some 2018 challenges that we carried over to here. And I'm just curious if we stopped our focus on those 2018 challenges. And that's why we have, carry, I know we've improved in some of those areas, but I want to make sure that in those challenges that we really have a good comprehensive plan to try to work hard to mitigate some of those challenges, which I know we do, but I just wanna make sure that we don't forget, because 2018 to today, just something to keep us all accountable. Maybe we talk about this twice a year, it's on the agenda, we talk about this, what we can do better, what are we doing to improve on what is brought forward to us, okay? Just something to consider for the board as well, okay? And that's all that I have, with that, so I guess I have to go back to my agenda, Angela, huh? Okay, so, this does not require a motion, or anything, so does anybody have any additional comments or anything before? Chief, do you have any thank you again, thank you, Sam.
You're welcome.
I don't like some of the info on it, because the truth sometimes is, ouch, the salt, in that wound really burns, but it's important for us to know. And I'm so grateful that everyone up here is open and objective to improvement, to do better for our community. I'm really happy that our district takes this seriously, and that we're willing to do something like this and make that change, okay? So with that, this meeting will be adjourned to a special meeting of the Board of Directors of the Chino Valley Independent Fire District, held today, November 3rd at 6 p.m. right here at Fire District Headquarters, 14011 City Center Drive, Chino Hills. Thank you again.